All right, so this cute little winter scene is the first card that we're going to create in this class. And the very first step we're going to do is create the hills in the back and then the sky. So the die that I'm using for the hills in the back is this one here. It has all the pieces to it. And this is how I like to lay it before I start to die cut so that I know exactly what I want cut out of each one. So I'm going to take the die with the blade side. The blade side is raised. Put it against my paper. I like to put my dies in the machine with the blade side up. I find that I have less issues with them, and in my opinion, they tend to cut nicer the first time. I always like to keep my bottom plate uncut into so that I have at least one plate that is nice and flat. I'm going to do this with all of these. Now this particular die cut ends up being a little bit longer than we need, so it will be cut down. There we go, and I'm just going to leave them in the die so I know exactly which piece is what as I continue along. I'll be back once these are all cut. All right, all the pieces are done and cut, in time to layer them together. Now the cool thing is when you cut them, it lays an indent for the next piece. So it helps you to place exactly where it's supposed to go. I find it very helpful. And this particular hill set, this one has trees on it, but you can choose to do it without the trees. Like these first two layers don't have any of the trees on it, and this particular layer is just the snow. So if you wanted to just eliminate that to make it less bulky, you absolutely could. And I do it both ways. I have had times where I've left the trees off, and in this case I'm putting the trees on just because I thought they'd be pretty in the background for this. But sometimes if there's a lot of detail in the foreground of whatever it is that I'm creating, I will often just leave those trees off just because they're not necessary. All right, and any pieces that don't come out that are supposed to be out while you're assembling your hills, just pop them out before gluing your pieces down. You could also use a stamped image for the back of this. This particular class I'm using all dies, but if you wanted to just do a stamped background, you absolutely can. And I say I'm using all dies, but I am going to use a stencil, a snowflake stencil for the background. I thought it'd be pretty to have a nice snowy sky, but they're quite subtle, so we will do that next once we've got our hills and trees all together. I want to make sure to be able to give that sky some time to dry before we continue on, because we do not want to have wet stencil paste while we're creating. I just realized I needed to, that's why I was second guessing. I need to put this guy down first. But that is the nice part about using liquid adhesive. It's very easy to go back and fix. Lift it up before it's dry. There we go. This one here. I typically like to tap my dies to get the pieces out. Most of the time they come out. If they don't, you can use a die pick and just help poke that out. And this particular adhesive that I'm using is, it's a matte collage medium. And the nice thing about it, especially for gluing down die cuts and stuff like that, is A, it's liquid, I can move things around. B, it is completely clear when it's dry, so if some of it seeps through, you're never going to see it because it's clear. And then the other thing is that it is matte, so you're not going to see a different texture if by chance it does seep through and some of it dries. There's some adhesives that dry clear, but they're glossy, so you still see a glossy area where the glue has dried. I like this because it doesn't leave that glossy area. And then the other glue that I like to use is Tombow Mono Multi. And it has similar properties, as in it's liquid and you can move it, it dries nice and fast. But the thing I don't particularly love about it is that if there's any glue that seeps out and is exposed, it kind of dries like a sticky Post-it note. So you don't really want that on a finished project. However, that property is perfect for creating masks for stamped images and stuff like that. This one goes right in here. Because you can use that, the fact that it glues dries sticky, to your advantage. So that is why there's thousands upon thousands of different adhesives in the world, because they all have their own unique properties, things that they're good for and they're handy for. Now some of these pieces are getting a little bit small, and sometimes when they're quite tiny, I like to use some tweezers to help hold them. This particular pair of tweezers is one that closes on its own and you have to press it to open it. So for doing things like this, it's quite handy. And then the last one, this tiny little guy right here, that is barely noticeable in the background. There we go. All right, I'm gonna let that sit and dry before I glue it down. I am gonna cut it down. Before I put that aside too much, I'm going to take my background here. Now I want to cut this a little bit shorter so that I've got room to put my double-sided foam tape around it. But what I'm going to do here, I'm just going to take a little pencil, create a line where that hill is, because I don't want my snowflakes to go beyond that. There we go. I'm going to grab an acrylic block just to hold all those bits down while they're drying. And here is my stencil. I'm just using some transparent, translucent grit paste for this, because I want the snowflakes to be transparent, nice and clear. So I'm going to do my paper to the side just so that I can see the line and I can have a little bit more control. This doesn't need to be perfect. No snowflake is perfect. And I want my height of my paste to be the height of the stencil. I don't want thick gobs above it. So you want to be able to see your stencil through there. Lift that up. That's going to be washed in moments. You don't want to leave any texture paste to dry on your stencil. And I'm just scraping the edges of the stencil here so that when I go to put my double-sided foam tape, I've got space for it. That's one of the things that I forgot to do while I was creating my sample, and ended up having to try to scrape it while it was dry. So easier to do it while it's wet. I've just got some rock candy glitter here. It's just a transparent glitter, and I'm going to tilt my piece both ways so that it goes on even on the side of that texture paste. Put the excess back in the container. And then I did get some paste a little bit below my hill line here, so I'm just going to scrape it a little bit. Let that dry, clean this off. I'll see you back again once everything's dry.